Hey, deserving listeners, 90 Day Fiancé, let's watch. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor, and this is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. As I always say, don't use YouTube or this channel as a replacement for therapy. If you need a therapist, get one. You deserve it. Let's watch 90 Day Fiancé.
I mean, every time that I talk to him about it and I try to bring it up, he's just so dismissive and just like is so quick to change the subject. It drives me insane. And he's like, I don't want some stranger hanging out with my baby all day or like touching them or like making them food, or what if they try to like abuse her or something? And
Okay, so there's a lot to say here. I didn't show all the clips, but we can see once again that Libby is triangulating with her family, which is fine on a certain level if it was limited. But Libby is concerned in the past, and I'm guessing all the time, that her husband is not getting along with her family of origin. So when she goes to her family of origin and complains and complains and complains, it is just fuel added to the fire. So later on, this is likely to blow up in Libby's face, and then she's going to reject her family and feel like, what's happening here? Why is everyone fighting? When she is just complaining and complaining. Now, everyone deserves to vent. If you are concerned about something with your spouse, you should have someone that you can talk with about that. But you have to be careful about how you talk about it. You have to try to be a little differentiated. Like if you're in Libby's position, you could say something like, well, I really want a nanny, and I understand he doesn't. You know, I can kind of see where he's coming from, but man, it really is frustrating because I wish he would agree with me, but I understand where he's coming from. You know, have some back and forth, some ability to say like, well, maybe my opinion isn't the only opinion on the planet. The other thing I can say here is that Andrei is appearing to exhibit sexism in his attitudes towards what they're supposed to do in terms of work. So he is having trouble finding work. She is working, and she is expected to do most of the housework and the childcare. Now, that's Libby's account. We don't know what Andrei would say, but we could imagine that that is accurate. And this is common. So men are taught from an early age that, one, you're not supposed to do housework, you're not supposed to do women's work, or else that makes you not a man. And if you're not a man, then that is one of the worst things you could possibly be. We have all these phrases that exhibit this. You got to man up. You got to have the balls to do something. You have to be chivalrous. You know, there's all these words that we have that are even in a neutral sense. We have all these words constantly from the day children are born. It's less so now, but it's still present, that indoctrinates human beings, young human beings, and old human beings for that matter, into the ideas of masculinity and femininity, which can involve toxic elements of both, toxic masculinity, toxic femininity. And this will extremely limit people in terms of their ability to think straight and in terms of getting their needs met. So, I don't know in Moldova, but I could imagine that Andrei had absorbed that similar, gender ideal and is now struggling to find work, and he's really trying, or, well, is he trying? I mean, he seems to be thinking he's trying. I don't know. Anyway, putting that aside, he is now forcing Libby to not only work, but also take care of the kids. And that is sexist, and I've worked with a lot of men on this issue. And it's hard. You know, you'd think it would just be like, hey, you realize that that's not logical, right? You realize that if she's going to work and do all the housework and do all the childcare, and you're going to do nothing, or you're just going to help, you understand that's not a fair distribution of labor. For some men, they're so insecure, or they're so backward, or they're so indoctrinated, or they're just so entrenched, or they're so insecure about their manlyhood that it's just like impossible, seemingly impossible for them to consider being different and having a different attitude and acting different. Especially in public is one of the things. Sometimes some men will do things that they would consider to be women's work as long as no one notices outside the family anyway. So he seems to be exhibiting that, or at least Libby is observing that. The other thing I'll talk about is that Libby says, look, can't we just get a nanny? You know, this is a workaround. She's like, I've been trying to convince him to help out more and to do more, at least get a job or something, so that maybe I wouldn't have to work, but he's not getting he's not pulling in an income, hasn't, and he's not helping out around the house, he's not doing childcare. And so maybe if we just got a nanny, that would help, at least me. So it's unfortunate that Libby has to resort to that, but Now, for her, she and her sister, they're saying it's totally normal to have a nanny. And it is. In middle, upper class America, it is quite normal. And it can be fine. Daycare, my mom had a daycare in my house. A lot of my knowledge of humans actually was absorbed during that time. My mom, I'm 10 years old, and my mom is taking care of 15 children under the age of 5, and I'm just watching my mom masterfully help kids get their needs met. I'm watching the kids grow up. I'm playing with the kids myself throughout my childhood as well, and learning about just, through osmosis, really, what was happening for humans as they develop. Anyway, so I saw how wonderful daycare can be and how wonderful, essentially, nannying can be, where there's a bond between child and the nanny or the daycare provider, babysitter. So it can be great, but it actually can cause harm. But the key is that the parents, Libby and Andrei, need to have a secure relationship with that child. The child is desperate for a secure relationship with their parents. If they have enough security, enough time, enough attunement, enough attention, they can absolutely tolerate venturing off into the world and having a nanny, a daycare, or even going to school later on in life. But they need that secure attachment first. So some families will inadvertently, they'll work a lot and they won't have that attunement and that time with the children, and they'll have a nanny, and the child will actually shift their attachment away from the parents towards the nanny, which is extremely dangerous because the nanny is not likely to stick around very long. And the child doesn't understand that. The nanny will leave or the daycare will end because the child will go to preschool or kindergarten. And the child is confused because emotionally, the nanny and the daycare provider is their parent, is their primary attachment figure because they couldn't really depend on their parents. Some parents make this mistake, usually as a result of their own relational traumas when they were growing up. And the upper classes are prone to this because they have a history going back hundreds of years. Look to the royal family for the example of this, where it was unseemly, it was untidy to have to do childcare. And so there's this tradition of, it's sort of like the privilege because they can pay for someone else to take care of, because taking care of kids is work, it's hard. But you miss out on that attachment, that deep relationship that your children desperately want from you. And so they naturally will transfer their attachment to anyone who is consistently there for them. And if it's a nanny, then it will be a nanny. But the nanny will leave in all likelihood. Some nannies don't, and then we're okay usually. But a lot of nannies they'll be around for a year or two, maybe 3 at the most, and then they're gone. And the child, their entire world is ripped apart. And actually, you hear me talk about attachment theory. John Bowlby, the originator of attachment theory, 70 years ago or something, 80 years ago, when he was a child, this is what his life was like. He was a rich child, and him and his siblings, I can't remember the details. Listen to my whole deep dive on attachments for patrons only. And a lot of people like this deep dive, and I do too. I learned a lot doing it. John Bowlby, the originator of attachment theory, early in life had nannies, and his parents weren't very close to him. And when the nanny left, he remembers this as an adult, as he's developing attachment theory, noticing how horrific that was for him and how difficult that was, how horrible of a loss that was for him, and how he still has emotional issues as a result of that loss of his nanny. Even though his parents never abused him, they were, I guess, kind of there for him, but he didn't have an attachment. His parents weren't a secure base. So that's what I'll say about that. Now, I don't know Libby and Andrei. They seem to be good enough parents. It's hard to tell, but they seem to be good enough. And so having a nanny would be totally fine. Under most circumstances, on average. Now, the other thing that Andrei is saying is that in Moldova, they don't have nannies. That's what Andrei is claiming. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what he's claiming. And there's some cultural issue here. So Americans, particularly this family, will say, well, in America, we do it we have nannies. In Moldova, you don't have nannies. America is great. Number one, yay, yay, yay. We do everything right. Therefore, Moldova is wrong. Americans are terrible about this. We think we do everything right. We think all of our cultural practices are better than everywhere around the world. And statistics show we are dead wrong on that issue. Issues that are typically in children, anxiety, depression, PTSD, attachment problems, are seemingly, it's hard to measure this exactly because are we talking apples and oranges, but seemingly in America, we have much higher rates of these issues. Why? Probably because of the way we parent our children. What are the factors? Well, we have a lot of parents that are working literally 70 hours a week, and they're working from home as well because their boss is emailing them all the time. Parents they don't get enough sleep. There's a lot of parenting practices where we put kids in cribs and we neglect them. I could go on and on about how our cultural parenting practices are actually damaging our children. And we can see the result: higher suicide rates, higher anxiety rates, more materialism, sadness, health problems, you name it. That we are seeing a whole number of issues that could be attributed to our culture of parenting. Our culture is primarily focused on individualism and materialism, and children are not a part of that equation. In fact, they're opposite to that movement. To be an individual, you can't be dedicated to a child. You can't be dedicated to any other human being. To be materialistic, that has nothing to do with the child, unless you're dressing up your child in fancy clothes and taking a picture of them and putting them on Instagram. I'm not going to shame that, but if that is all you do with your kid, then I am going to shame that. So for Andrei to look at American culture and say, like, look, y'all have nannies here. We don't have nannies in Moldova. And I want to come to the table with my cultural idea of like what we're supposed to do as parents. Now, of course, the best thing for Andrei to do would be to step up and say, I'm going to be the primary parent because you're working all the time. And I'm okay with that because I'm man enough to be okay with that sort of thing. But I worry that once again, Libby and her family are going to assume that America is number one and all of our practices are number one. And they're just going to claim that they're right and he's wrong. The other thing I'll say is that Andrei is saying his opposition to a nanny is, how are we going to know that the nanny won't harm our child? We have to put cameras everywhere. What happens if the nanny takes the child into a room where we don't have a camera and they harm and abuse our child? So, that's a rational worry. It's not likely to happen because most nannies aren't likely to do that. But, it is something that you could worry about. This also points to the possibility that Andrei was abused as a child in some way, and he is much more sensitive to that. So those are all the factors. Let's watch.
Like,
are you kidding me right now?
People.
He's literally thinking of like the worst case scenario.
I know.
I think that whole, no, I don't want anyone watching my daughter and it's his culture and blah, blah, blah. Like, it's I think he's actually using those as excuses and reasons when really it's just a control factor.
So that could be that for Andrei, he is, well, I don't know. It's hard to imagine that would be true. It could be true. It's not likely to be true in my opinion. I don't know anything. Who am I? She knows Andrei much better than I do. But that's usually the assumption, is that Andrei is not getting a nanny because he basically just wants to control Libby and wants to ruin her life. It's possible, but not likely.
Stay dad, but he also didn't have a job at the time. He doesn't barely have a job now. If he's putting all of this on you to do, like, it would be much better if you guys did have a nanny or a babysitter that came over every once in a while, took Ellie for walks, took her to go play, did stuff with her while you got your work done.
So you hear me often talk about triangulation. If I were in the sister's shoes, what I would say to Libby is, yeah, you know what? It sounds like the two of you are having a difference. In his culture, which we can value, he is saying that he doesn't want to get a nanny. And for you, in our culture, it's normal to get a nanny and you would like to get a nanny. So you have this difference, and it's a cultural difference. And when you married someone from another country halfway across the world, I assume, Sister Libby, that you understand that he has a different culture and that we can't change that. And just because he's living in America doesn't mean that he has to think like an American. I'm sure you understand that, sister. And so don't be condescending and sarcastic, Kirk. Okay, so I would say, I hope that you can work this out. Is there a way that you can talk with him in a way that you both can come to an agreement? How do you want to talk with him about this? I would also validate her. It sounds frustrating. You want to get a nanny and he doesn't. I understand that's very frustrating to you. I could see how that would be really frustrating. I'd be with her on that. But I wouldn't say, well, we're right as Americans and we just have to force him to change, because that is not likely to work. especially with Andrei, right? So when we're being triangulated, the focus you want to have is, how can I help them work this out on their own so that they don't really even need me anymore, so that they can actually have a routine of working things out that they can generalize to other conflicts.
Yeah.
Like, what is the harm in that?
I know.
You can do background checks, you can check references, get recommendations from people. I mean, I have a good nanny I can give you.
Really?
Yeah.
Like, what am I gonna say to him?
I mean, do you have to tell him?
What? I don't think Libby will consider this. She doesn't seem like that type of person. Every once in a while, this comes up on the show. Deceitfulness? Really? I mean, if you're trying to trick someone, like, I don't know, you're trying to sell a car to someone and you really need the commission, so you try to trick them into thinking the car is a little better. Well, if they find out that you tricked them, it's just a customer. They just won't come back to your dealership anymore. But to trick your husband and he finds out, which he will, then that's a complete erosion of trust. Imagine that. Imagine your spouse, you're having a conflict, and then your spouse just goes, well, I'm just going to do it anyway, regardless of us talking about it. Like, your spouse is like, I want to buy a motorcycle. And you're like, I don't know if that's a good idea. And then they just go out and do it. And you're like, so I guess that's the kind of relationship we have, where we just do things even though we know our spouse doesn't want us to.
How would I not tell him? We talk all day, every day.
Yeah, but
so
if you're
he
at
calls
home
me,
working and he goes to the gym or he goes somewhere, so then
like
he
a
wouldn't even
window.
know.
That's one of the dumbest ideas I've ever heard. And maybe the sister is just grasping at straws. I don't know. But let's walk ourselves through that. So he goes to the gym and she goes to work. She sneaks the nanny into the house. The nanny is home, and Andrei comes home a little early and sees a stranger in the house with his child. What do you think is going to happen?
And you can have her come over while you're working.
I just feel bad. I would feel bad lying to him.
I mean, I'm not telling you to lie.
You aren't? Yes, you are. That is one of the biggest lies. To say, okay, maybe we can have another term, like it's lying by omission. One of the biggest omissions you could possibly have to your fellow, to your spouse, the fellow parent of your child. Wow. So is this sister actually, I don't know. Sometimes I don't know. Are they just throwing stuff out there? Are they just having an emotional reaction? If this is where her moral compass points her, my goodness.
Okay, but I'm telling you to omit something from him. Omission's not a lie. He just doesn't have to know about it.
We literally have a phrase called lying by omission. It is lying. Let me give you some examples. Let's say that my wife actually, and this is true, she actually doesn't like to use fertilizer in the yard or any kind of chemicals in the yard because the dogs might eat it, cats might eat it, and get sick, which is a good thing to follow. Well, sometimes I'm like to get rid of a weed, you just really want to blast it with some massive chemical. So let's say that I just went behind her back and used the chemicals, but just didn't tell her. Is that lying? According to one definition, maybe not. It's definitely lying by omission. It's definitely deceitful, and it's definitely harmful to trust. It's definitely antisocial behavior. It's definitely like slightly pathological to just deceive someone like that, especially with your child. Just imagine out there. Just imagine someone, even if it's your spouse, gets a nanny for your child behind your back and doesn't tell you. You would hopefully flip your wig, and she should know that.
I would just feel bad about not discussing that with him first and like coming to a decision together. But I am at the point where
he
like
should feel bad. You're like feeling guilty about something that's actually helpful to you.
I can't believe Libby's saying the right things, but it sounds like she's considering this. I mean, is this where this is going? I would hope Libby wouldn't do that.
You're not like robbing a bank. You're asking for a nanny to watch your daughter so you can work.
Okay, yeah, you're not robbing a bank, but you're having a stranger watch your child that the other parent has not approved of at all, and you're going behind their... This is, at least in a relationship, this is like worse than robbing a bank. If Libby robbed a bank, at least that wouldn't necessarily be a massive deception or a massive trust violation on the level that I think this would be with Andrei.
There's nothing wrong with that. And if he has a problem with that, like, he needs to get over it.
Wow. I mean, the family's consistent. I'll give him that. But every time something like this happens, I'm like, I'm surprised, but why am I surprised?
I know that I need help.
That, do it. I'm gonna give you her number right now, because that's bull. And you can set it up, and Andrei can suck it.
Now, if Libby had not pumped a bunch of negative information into her sister's head, maybe the sister would have a different attitude. I don't know. So Libby could have created this monster herself. And Andrei doesn't do any help either by the way he treats the family or by the way he escalates the conflict between him and her family of origin. All right, well, that does it for that episode. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.